The purpose of the network is to you can kind of see what the statement says here. We are a learning community committed to transforming higher education and our communities by deconstructing systems of oppression through place-based community engagement. And I'll unpack that a little bit. So we are oriented around learning from each other and strategizing and understanding what our particular successes that different institutions have pursued or ideas they're pursuing, or also I think in many cases things we've tried that didn't work, and how that might inform our work to be thinking of the sort of purpose of the network, deconstructing systems of oppression. And particularly I would say that we have a focus on anti-racism and thinking of the field of community engagement and how we understand racism and institutionalized racism within our field, and kind of what are the particular ways that we can be thinking of how to unpack that, deconstruct that, and think about more equitable, more just ways of engaging. The particular tool or specific strategy that we pursue is place-based community engagement. Place-based community engagement often is defined as a university-wide effort to focus equally on campus and community impact in a specific geographic area. So I think the particulars of that definition, the equal impact on campus and community, is significant for the field of community engagement because frequently we focus 90% of our energy on the college student and wanting to provide opportunities for them to engage, and 10% on community impact. And what we're trying to do with the network is to focus equally on both and sort of create more equitable approaches to that engagement. The university-wide nature of these efforts is sort of often it's animating from a center for community engagement, or in the case of Georgetown, I think your Center for Service Justice Scholarship. I'm trying to think of the exact name, and it's sort of thinking as holistically as we can regarding the whole of the university. And then the nature of place-based is focused on a geographic area. Frequently, that's a series of neighborhoods or a specific region that is often adjacent to a campus, but not all the time adjacent to the campus. So that's the purpose. Here's a list of the members from last year. And what one can see on this list is there are institutions from all around the country, all around the United States, a number of faith-based institutions, but this is not an exclusively faith-based network. I think it does animate somewhat from the Jesuit network, but there are a number of institutions, as an example, the University of Pittsburgh and Drexel and others that are private or public institutions, University of Maryland, Baltimore, University of Wisconsin, University of Washington. So that's the member list from last year. And then a little bit about our history and values. And then I'll turn to Aaron to describe the membership structure and the fee structure, and then we can just open it up for discussion. So the network started in 2014 when Seattle University hosted a gathering for other universities interested in place-based community engagement, particularly at Seattle U. We've been, for the past 10 years, pursuing an intensive partnership in neighborhoods just south and east of our campus that we call the Seattle University Youth Initiative. So for several years, we hosted gatherings during the summer at Seattle U that shared some of the things that we were learning, and then also encouraged other universities to share what they were learning from their approach to place-based community engagement. The Annie Casey Foundation started sponsoring those events and started taking an interest in the opportunity for forming a network and these institutions influencing each other, and also the wider field of community engagement in higher education. In February of 2018, we gathered a small group of leaders from the network to really consider one thing, which was we knew that we were committed to place-based community engagement, but to what end, what purpose? And what surfaced from that was the values that are here on the right, and also the commitment to anti-oppression and deconstructing systems of oppression. The values that are here on the right are what we try to structure our different professional development opportunities around and our conversations around. I'll read them since we're sort of videotaping this, but I'll also just sort of maybe offer a little commentary as we go. We are committed to an anti-oppressive framework that recognizes intersectionality. And I think I've already mentioned there's a particular focus on anti-racism, but there's also a recognition of intersectionality within that. We pursue partnerships and initiatives that are long-term, reciprocal, and grounded in deliberate process. The nature of place-based work really calls us to be in relationship for a long period of time, and also to understand the context, the history of neighborhoods, often the history of how racism and other forms of oppression have impacted our communities and our neighborhoods. Third, we emphasize actions that are defined by community-identified goals that foster self-determination. So this is really, again, the orientation around the 50-50 focus on campus and community. It invites us to come alongside community leaders and community organizations and amplify the work that's occurring. And as best possible, sort of to be in solidarity and not come with our own agendas. Fourth, we recognize that the change occurs through continuous individual and collective learning and action. And this is sort of points to the learning network and the orientation of, as individuals, we continue to learn. I'll just say myself as a white identifying male, that there's a lot that I'm unpacking around whiteness and masculinity, and then how that rolls up into our organizations, the organization that I lead, and then the whole of our network and our universities. And I think it's an individual, organizational, and collective journey. And then finally, we honor that this work involves openness, integrity, and humility. I think we recognize that we don't have all the answers, and the network itself continues to evolve and change. Before I turn kind of over to Aaron, the one observation I would have is we are moving towards more structure. We have a 10-person steering committee that represents different institutional members from the network. And that group just met yesterday, sort of strategizing our plans for this year. We're also trying to, while we create structure, we're trying to remain organic and not become too formal. So it's sort of holding two polarities, if you will, in terms of structure and responsiveness and adaptation. Aaron, I'll turn to you to describe the membership processes, and I'm going to stop sharing. And then Justin, here in a moment, we can just pause, see what questions you have. Aaron.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that, Kent. And I'm going to go ahead and screen share this page from the membership overview. There's a lot more context in there, and it goes into what we think the benefits are of joining. But we did introduce this new sliding scale. It's adapted from AORTA, which is an anti-oppression training group. They've been doing national work for the past few years, and they created this really intentional self-assessment. So we're asking our members, both new members and continuing members, to self-assess through this quiz on this page at these three levels, at $500, $750, or $1,000, based on the overall operating budget and fundraising of each institution. And so this is, on our system. We're not going to ask you for any documentation. Really, it's about taking a look at what the assets are of each member institution. And then it's a pretty brief enrollment survey where we ask you to describe the self-describe your place-based work, give us some contact information, of course, any social media or websites that we can send to folks. And then we'll send an invoice over, and payment is due in mid-October. So this is new for us. It seems to be going really well. People have been really responsive to it. In the future, we do hope to offer individual memberships, but at this point, we're just looking at institutions of higher education, colleges or universities. And one question we get often is, how far along in your process do you have to be in a place-based engagement initiative? And the answer is, you don't have to be far at all. You can really be exploring this as a conversation on campus, looking at models. You could be pretty far in your development. We have some members who've been doing this work for 25 plus years, and Kent can definitely speak to some of those histories of folks that we learned from who've really set the stage for how to do this work well. So definitely a learning and growing community. Every one of our members has so much to contribute to how to do this work well and in their specific context geographically. And we really are across the United States. We did have one member in Canada at one point, so but we are mostly based in the US at this point. So I think at this point we can really pause the recording and offer up space for any questions you have, Justin.
Aaron, maybe I can talk. Justin had that other question around successes, and so maybe I
Oh
can
yeah,
talk briefly.
that's great.
Justin, last year, so first of all, the pandemic, as it did with all our institutions, for invited us as a network to think creatively about how to stay connected in a more virtual way. So we offered a virtual leadership retreat in December that was a multi-day experience, and then a more intensive summer institute that occurred in July, and then some periodic gatherings that were more of an hour, hour and a half experience, webinar, workshops, and presentations. We also continue and will this year too, offering a next generation fellowship for emerging leaders of color in the field of place-based community engagement. And that's co-facilitated by a couple of leaders from the network. And the strategy there is to try to influence our whole field to think more inclusively about leaders of color within the community engagement field, a field that really its history and its context is kind of arises more from sort of white culture and white norms. So, and then this year, I think we're continuing the fellowship. We'll offer a smaller, shorter leadership institute. There'll be a summer institute next summer, and then there'll be monthly what we call salons, which are framing conversations, inviting anyone to participate. Those are kind of the major activities. So with that, maybe I'll pause, Justin, see if you have questions. Laura, I realize you're also, I mean, you're starting your first week or two of the internship, so feel free to ask questions as well. This is a really great way of orienting you or further orienting you as well. Questions?
Thank you, Kent and Aaron. It's a pleasure to be with both of you. And I'm really, as a person who has not much experience in understanding this network, it sounds fantastic. And I do a lot of anti-racist and dismantling of toxic masculinity and white supremacy within ourselves and our bodies work personally and at the center as well. So this is pretty fantastic. I don't have many questions. You mentioned, I just want to make sure that I got the notes down, Leadership Institute in December. And then you mind sharing just a little bit of tad about the summer? What was the Summer Institute, I believe?
Yeah. So, I mean, Aaron, we can tag team on this. The Leadership Institute this year in December is going to be shorter, 3 hours, and it is going to be for the people who are in the network who are serving on different committees. And shortly after the membership drive, we'll put out a call to invite individuals from member institutions to serve on committees. There's 3 of them. There's one that's a sustainability network that's looking at the long-term strategy for the network and how it sort of both funding strategy and pursuing some grants and also the long-term fiscal sponsorship. Currently, Seattle is the fiscal sponsor. The second committee is a membership committee, and they put on the leadership gathering, the Summer Institute, the salons, and there's also opportunities for some individual consulting that member institutions might seek. And then the third committee is a committee that's around influencing the nationally and regionally our field of community engagement. And within that group is also the fellows program. So inviting people to participate in that. So a December gathering that will be 3 hours long, a leadership gathering. The Summer Institute will occur most likely over 3 days, and we need to follow how the pandemic evolves and also how our institutional budgets evolve around whether that will be a virtual or in-person experience. And then the salons are going to be monthly experiences that are probably an hour to hour and a half-ish.
Thank you so much.
And I'll just add a couple other places. So we have a monthly newsletter we send out. So it's a space to share any news stories about place-based work. And we would invite Georgetown to share any content or recent research. And then there's also a really active LinkedIn group. And so people are now posting job opportunities in the field, announcements, questions, things like that. And so there's other places to connect as well, in addition to those live events. And we're open to your ideas too. One thing to emphasize is that this is a volunteer run network. And so the steering committee and all the leadership are folks donating their time and expertise to grow this movement. And so we're really grateful to everyone who's been part of this to date.